Hey everybody, I'm really glad you found Suncrest Messages. I do hope you'll take a minute to subscribe to either our podcast or our YouTube channel. And you can also download the Suncrest app. There's great stuff there that goes far beyond these messages. Either way, I hope that the next 30 minutes helps you integrate faith with your life. Enjoy. Hey Suncrest, I trust you saw the video that I linked in my email earlier this week. We are getting closer to regathering again, and honestly, I can't wait. If you didn't see the video yet, you can go on our Facebook page or make sure you sign up for my note from Greg in the Suncrest app. I want you to know that when we do end up returning to gathering in person, we are absolutely, of course, going to continue these online experiences. So many of you have found us online, and I want you to know if that's the case for you, I feel like you're part of our church family. And I hope that you feel that way too. The experience online has some uniqueness, but there's absolutely this encouragement that comes our way when you share your information with us, or you drop me an email, or you talk about how you've experienced the work of God in your life. So I'm so grateful for everyone who's watching right now. Now, today I'm going to start a new 3-week teaching series called What Happy People Know. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to discover all kinds of things about happiness. And we should just acknowledge a couple of things here at the beginning, right? Number one, unless you're different than almost everybody, you are on a chase for happiness. And I want you to know that's okay. It's kind of in our DNA as human beings. It's kind of in our DNA as Americans. I mean, the Declaration of Independence says that we're here for the pursuit of happiness. And you can even see it in people's lives. If I ask you about your weekend last weekend or last month or whatever, people start to categorize things into things that were happy or not happy. In that video I mentioned, I was talking about my Memorial Day weekend, which was awesome. I got a haircut. That's cool. I got to hang out with our 1-year-old on the playset in the backyard. So much fun. I got to see lots of people I know out and about. And just when I think about it, it generates this happiness. But some of you will think back to last weekend and it won't be marked with happiness. We just divide the world that way. And honestly, I know some cranky people. I have a guy in my mind right now. I'll let him remain nameless. But he's just not happy. And then I find out that when I hang out around him, I'm not very happy. So of course I stop hanging out around him, and then he's lonely and he's even more unhappy. And so for us to pay attention to where happiness comes from, how we can keep from pushing it away and how we can draw it in, I think that's a really important conversation. And the good news is God is on board with our pursuit of happiness. Now, if you grew up in a religious home, it's possible you got the impression that God was actually a cosmic killjoy trying to take all the fun out of life. I can promise you that's not who God is. He talks a lot about our pleasant experiences, our joyfulness, our happiness. And it is true that happiness shouldn't be the highest aim of our life, but it's not an ugly aim. And interestingly, I think ironically, some of the wisdom that the scriptures give us is that aiming at happiness a lot of times doesn't end up with happiness, but aiming at a couple of things that are higher actually bring happiness in our lives. So I want to start today with 2 questions for you. Question number 1, how happy of a person are you? Do this, scale of 1 to 10, maybe even just use your fingers, right? Scale of 1 to 10, 10 being awesome, 0 being horrible. How happy are you? Are you a 4? Are you 6? Are you a 9? I don't know. If you're watching this with someone in the same room right now, you might even take the risk to tell them what your happiness number is right now. I'm really curious. How happy do you feel? But that's just question number 1. Question number 2 is the important question. Why isn't that number higher? What could you do to get that number higher? And a lot of times when I talk to people in conversations where they're searching for happiness and I ask them, why isn't your happiness number higher? I get 3 common responses. Number 1, people will say, well, it's someone else's fault. They've had an experience with someone else and the blame goes outward. Number 2, they'd say, well, I haven't figured out how to be happy yet. And I think that's fascinating because there's been lots of people who have tried to search out what brings happiness. And answer number 3 is basically when people say, I know what I need to do to find happiness, but I just haven't been willing to do it yet. I haven't been willing to move. Now, if you'd indulge me for a moment, if one or more of those answers resonated with you, I want to give you some advice on how to think about those things. If you said it's someone else's fault and you blame other people for your happiness, you'll remain unhappy. And I'm not really blaming you for that. I actually have a lot of sensitivity for this because I talk to people who've been through very traumatic situations where they've been sexually abused or they had to bury one of their own children. It totally makes sense that happiness is very hard to find because of something that happened out of their control. And yet, we should all pay attention that if I look around and I say, the reason I'm not happy is because of my dad and my brother and my sister and my boss and my friends, then we have to acknowledge that maybe the problem isn't out there, but we should look in here. Now, when people say they honestly haven't figured out happiness yet, I have an enormous respect for that because you are in good company of many people throughout history and many people in the scriptures who pursued all kinds of things, hoping for happiness, chased them, didn't find it, and then had to course correct in order to go try to find it a new place. And if that's you, I think this 3-week series is going to be exceptionally helpful because the scriptures reveal to us what to chase in order to find happiness. The third group that is honest and says, I think I know what I need to do. I'm just not willing or motivated to do it. I hope that this series helps you too, because by seeing what could be, a lot of times that's what we need to press us through the awkward spaces of moving through something uncomfortable. I always say life is on the other side of awkward, and I think maybe you'll move today. So the overarching theme that makes people happy, the thing that happy people know, is that happiness is always centered in relationships. It's all about our relationships. There is no thing that can make you happy. And we all know this kind of instinctively. When my relationships are good, if I feel like, man, my marriage is thriving, I'm connecting with my kids, my mom and I are talking, my friendships are healthy, life is good. Lots of things could go wrong. I could lose my health, I could lose my job, I could lose my money, I could lose all kinds of things. But if relationships are good, man, life is good. And I talk with people all the time, usually in a setting that's confidential because they don't want to reveal this to many people. But they'll say to me, Greg, I have everything I chased. I have a beautiful woman, I have money in the bank, I have the title and the power and the influence, all those things. But I don't have love. My kids, my spouse, my friends. Life isn't any fun. It's not happy. Happiness is absolutely centered in our relationships. And so in the coming weeks, I'm going to talk about our relationships with our kids as parents and our relationships in a marriage or as a single person and think, what do happy people know about that? But today I want to start with the idea of friendships. And I think friendships are historically the most undervalued category of relationships. Now, there's one book of the Bible that addresses this with wisdom, and it focuses on building a great life, guiding us to the critical nature of friends in our lives. And it does this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. I can't overemphasize it. There are so many verses, so much wisdom about this. I'll never get to it all. Some of it's surprising. Some of it's challenging. Some of it's insightful. But all of it falls under the heading of what happy people know. And so I'm just going to spend a minute or two here reading these scriptures. And I want you to listen to the scriptures with your friendships in mind. People who you think of as your best friend. People who you think of as good friends. None of our relationships should put all of our weight on one person, but none of us are going to make it there if we just live with a breadth of acquaintances and companions. So I want you to think about the friends you have, or maybe the friends you don't have, while I read these passages. Listen to this wisdom. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Whoever rebukes a person will in the end gain favor rather than the one with the flattering tongue. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. Perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from their heartfelt advice. Like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on a wound, is the one who sings songs to a heavy heart. So what do happy people know? Let's just start with this. Happy people know friends play a role that family cannot play. I actually think one of the biggest dilemmas in our relational worlds today is we place too much pressure on our families. We place way too much pressure on our marriages, that the person we're married to has to bring us happiness, has to satisfy every need, has to be our lover and our friend and our confidant and companion. There's no way any one person should ever experience the weight of all those expectations. But if someone doesn't have a circle of friends, what happens is all those expectations get put on your spouse or on your family. And the scriptures are telling us God didn't design it that way, that you do need friends in addition to your family. The scriptures actually say there's a consistency to a friendship that family doesn't always have. Remember, it said a friend is there at all times, a brother is there in times of adversity. And we actually, most of us experience that whether you have a good relationship with a sibling or not, a lot of times they're just there when you need them. When someone's died, when something's sad, when there's a tragedy that's hit, they step in. There's a certain family obligation to do so, and that's not a bad thing. But friendships are different. They're people you engage consistently over and over again. You see, in our pop culture, there's an emphasis on sexual relationships and romantic relationships, and it actually takes friendship and sets it in the back seat. And in a traditional culture that some of us grew up in, all the emphasis is on the family. Grandparents, parents, siblings, kids, grandchildren, everything is set on that family. And friendships are set aside. But in our busy culture, where we're all running like crazy, if something gets set aside or set to the back seat, it may as well have been completely dismissed. And when we allow the friendships of our lives to be dismissed, we miss out on happiness. Let me talk to you about a calibration of how friendships come about. Happy people know that friendships are first discovered and then forged. Now, these two words actually sit in a little bit of contrast with one another, and I want you to see how this lays itself out. The person who's out there just needing a friend, and they're just scanning, who could be my friend? They actually don't usually find friends. The scriptures, remember, said that pleasantness or sweetness is part of the experience of finding friends. And it's so fascinating to me. I discovered this week that the word sweetness there in the scriptures is talking about how when food was cooked in their day, they didn't have sugar. And so people couldn't add sugar. They couldn't make something sweet. They couldn't force it to be sweet. They had to go around and discover what was sweet. And the sense is that friendships work the same way. That you should look around and say, hey, God's placed different people in my path, and start to wonder which ones of those may emerge as a friendship, and go on a discovery process. I had an experience a number of years ago where I was in something called Leadership Northwest Indiana. And it was an awesome experience where for a year I got to hang out with school superintendents and government leaders and business leaders, just a good group of leaders around Northwest Indiana. It was a group of about 20 people. And of course, you don't get to know everyone in that group, but I noticed there's 4 or 5 or 6 people that I thought, I think maybe that would be a good friend. And then my practice was I'd say, hey, let's grab a meal together. Let's go to lunch together. And honestly, once or twice, I grabbed lunch with someone and thought, well, that was lunch. There's nothing really inside of me that wants to pursue a friendship. And apparently there was nothing inside of them that wanted to pursue a friendship with me either. And it just kind of faded away. I think that's okay. But there were 1 or 2 others where I thought, that took root. That led to meaningful conversations. And friends, you just have to let them emerge. See, this is what C.S. Lewis said about friendships. He said, one of the first moments in friendship is when you're talking to someone and the phrase says, what? You too? I thought I was the only one. Because something resonates with these 2 friends inside of us. You see, a lot of times we think about relationships as face-to-face, but friendship is actually a relationship that is really more shoulder to shoulder. It's lovers who have conversations about how much they love each other. But friends don't really have conversations about how great of friends they are. Instead, they have conversations about life, about the trials that they're facing together, about the celebrations that they can experience together, about victories and meaningful things and faith and such. It's so powerful that when you find someone who resonates with you, shoulder to shoulder, you can move forward. C.S. Lewis actually said, the very condition for having friends is that you would want something else beside friends. It can't just all be built on, I'm needing a friend. He says, do you see the same truth? You say, I don't really care about that. I just want you to be my friend. It doesn't work that way. He says, those who have nothing can share nothing. And those who are going nowhere can have no fellow travelers. So there's this openness to saying, who has God put in my life? And it's actually a question I want to ask you right now. Who has God put in your life that's become a great friend? You're shoulder to shoulder, you're having meaningful conversations. If someone like that is a part of your life, man, maybe even right now, you should just stop and text them and say, thanks for being a great friend. And if you look up right now and think, you know what? I don't know who's really shoulder to shoulder with me, we're pushing ahead together, then this is part of what happy people know. You'll have to go on a discovery process, and then you'll have to forge the friendship. First, you have to kind of let it come to you, and then you have to lean into it. And here's how forging the friendship works. Friendships are marked by a sense of carefulness. There's a sensitivity to friendships. Friends are not reckless with one another. Friends do not take one another for granted. And there's even something at an emotional level here that is so important. You see, you remember the proverb that said, someone who's insensitive would steal someone's coat when they're cold, or they would pour vinegar in a wound. He says that's like the kind of person who sings happy songs when someone else has a heavy heart. And to be a good friend, to have a good friend, there's a sense in which there's a carefulness to this. When they're sad, you're sad. And when they're happy, you're happy with them. It's actually one of the things I've discovered myself is that there aren't many people who I can just kind of say, hey, this is how I think God is amazing in my life right now. It might come across as bragging or something like that, but to a true friend, someone will celebrate it with me. And there's that sensitivity that you resonate emotionally with that friend. You know, some people will say something like, well, the truth hurts, and they'll say it flippantly and say, well, I think that's so insensitive. The truth does hurt. It really does. So if you want to be a friend, if you want to have a friend, it means paying attention with carefulness to the emotional levels of that relationship. But in tension with that at times will be the other important quality of friendship, that there is candor with one another. That being sensitive doesn't actually keep me from saying what needs to be said because I truly care about somebody. I hear people say all the time, oh, I couldn't say that to them. That would hurt them too much. But the thing they need to say is actually to save them from hurt and pain. And the truth is, we're just watching out for ourselves. And I want to encourage you in all of your relationships that you want to become friendships to go there. Now, this candor in relationships is where the scriptures start to say, hey, flattery, like it feels good at first, but it goes nowhere. Instead, the wounds of a friend can be trusted. It was Oscar Wilde who said, true friends will stab you in the front. And I love thinking about this because Jesus actually had a conversation in the upper room with his followers after they had spent a lot of time together. And this is what he says, I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Now, I actually just kind of love that phrase because in my home growing up, we use the phrase about being in someone's business. And most of the time it was negative. It was always personal. You know, we even say sometimes, get up in their business, right? But here's the question for your friendships and mine. Who knows your business? If you don't reveal the personal parts of your life to somebody, if you're not candid about those things, about your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your weaknesses, your sinfulness, there's not going to be a friendship that's formed. You're holding back who you are. And one of the principles actually of love is that someone can actually only love you to the degree that they know you. In our relationships all the time, they feel distance because we know we're putting up a front to someone else. We're presenting an aspect of ourselves that isn't actually the real thing. And then when they love us, we actually know they don't love us. They love the person I've acted like I am. But when you can be yourself, your true self, and when you can give advice, even tough advice, and when you can warn someone about a destructive path of their life, when there can be candor in tension with your carefulness, that is where friendships thrive. And so I want us to think about this. I want you to think right now about the friendships in your life or the lack of them. And I want to acknowledge that it's possible you listen to this whole message thinking, yeah, friendships are a good idea if only someone out there was a good friend to me. But of course, that's not how friendships work at all. The way that you forge a true friendship is not to find the one. It is to be the one. To be the one who's always there for someone else. To calibrate that sense of carefulness and candor in someone else's life. To go there in a relationship, to reveal certain things about yourself. And to ask personal questions of someone else. And I think that when you do, you could experience friendship. You know, one of the things that's gotten me through some of the lowest parts of my life are a couple of great friends that I have. And I think if I didn't have those friends, and I have one in mind in particular, I think I probably wouldn't be a pastor still today. I may not be married to Jenny still today. But there was a friend stuck closer than a brother who was there at all times, who encouraged me when I needed to be encouraged, and who told me the truth when I needed to hear it. And so, if you're searching for happiness and you don't have a circle of friends, I want you to know what happy people know. Friendships really matter. They don't get generated automatically. You discover them out of the people God's placed in your life, and then you take a couple risks to go places relationally. And maybe the very best move for you to make today is to think through your coworkers or your neighbors, to scroll through the contacts in your phone and think, man, who is it that God placed in my life who I resonate with? Seems like we share some values. Maybe we even share this trust in Christ. Shoulder to shoulder. Let's at least grab lunch together or breakfast together and see if it goes somewhere. I want to pray for that right now. God, thanks for your goodness to us. Thanks for not making it a secret how we can experience happiness, and give us the vulnerability and the courage to form and forge friendships. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.